Welcome, I'm Sylvester Bishop. I'm the innkeeper at the Spotswood Arms, and today we're going to talk about 18th century bottles, fairly typical things that will help you understand what goes on at my tavern. First and foremost, in the beginning in taverns, most everything came in barrels, and these barrels would range anywhere from probably 50 gallons to this 2.5 like this one that I've got right here in front of me. From barrels, it would be tapped, and you would bring a pitcher to that, fill the pitcher up with liquid, whatever it happened to be, beer, liquor, wine, and then it would be dispensed accordingly into, depending on your income, of course, a nice stemware glass like this one, or something that if I was worried about it getting broken, that the appropriate people would use. Well, let's get to the bottles. The first bottle I have here is the onion bottle, and it is one of the most typical bottles of the 17th and 18th century, at least the early 18th century. Note its shape, note its name because of its shape. It's all bottles were hand blown. It's a typical green glass, and on the bottom it has the broken pommel where the glass blower had snapped off the rod that he was blowing. The next in our group here is the hoof bottle. Some people call this even a mallet bottle, but I think the hoof is more appropriate. It is a late 17th century, early 18th century bottle. Be very typical seen during those times. It has a concave bottom and it has a broken pommel as well. A very, very nice bottle. The next bottle we have is the mallet bottle. And it is one of the most well-known of all 18th century bottles throughout probably the majority of the century. This one in particular, again, is hand-blown, concave bottom, broken pommel, very typical of the times. Next in our line, we have a really, really well-known bottle called the case bottle, or the Dutch gin bottle. This bottle is square, and it's called a case bottle because it was blown in a square mold where they could be stacked together and it would have less nature of tipping, etc. Note the bottom, again, broken pommel, and of course its shape very square because of the mold it was cast in or blown in. Next we have the wine bottle. Some people call it a French wine bottle. It's, again, very typical of the entire, well, probably the last half of the 18th century, maybe a little more. Again, concave bottom, broken pommel. And it was very typical wine bottle. Last but not least in our bottles here, we've got another, it's a kind of a spin-off from the mallet bottle. Although this one was blown in a mold as well because it has 7 sides and it's a mold bottle. The unique thing about this one is it has a seal on it, and seals were put on bottles to mark for ownership. In other words, at the Spotswood Arms, if I wanted my bottles back when I sent them out to be filled at the local distillery, etc., I would have my seal on them, and that way I knew that I would get all my bottles back, filled like they were supposed to be. This one also has a typical 18th century bottle ticket on it. This one's saying for port wine. And because of all these bottles being the dark colors, once the liquids were in them, it was extremely hard to figure out what was what unless you had so marked them. The biggest thing that occurred in the 18th century, or actually late 17th century, was the invention of the cork for use in a bottle. Prior to that, the cork had been used for holding up fishing nets and other things like that, until it was invented and bottles could be corked. That way they could be stored in residence. It basically gave the barrel a back seat to storing these liquids, because you could store them at your own convenience in your own bottles, or the bottles either here at the Spotswood Arms or elsewhere. Last but not least, when the cork was invented, you had to have some way or another to get it out of the bottle, hence the corkscrew. This is an 18th century folding corkscrew. This is a late 18th century Hensel corkscrew. Notice the brush to brush off the top of the cork so no dust would get in your wine. And last but not least, this unique invention is what is called a picnic corkscrew, and would make a very handy corkscrew to keep in your pocket or elsewhere. So these bottles and these devices are very, very typical of the 18th century, and you would definitely find them in most households, and especially here at the Spotswood Arms. Thank you for visiting us, and I hope you'll come back again sometime and have a drink with us, at your expense, of course.